every student. Thank you for all the participants who have joined, and thank you very much. As I can see my presentation clearly, I really look forward for questions and encouragement with critical answers that I would hopefully be providing to all the participants here. Now, without further ado, let me start my lecture. And to start my lecture, firstly, I would go with the topic. It's really important to see the topic once and twice and thrice, because understanding a socio-economic perspective relates with a lot to do with anthropology, a lot with history, a lot with co-current situations, a lot with legal infrastructure, especially because we are affiliated with law schools, Nusa Putra as well as Kathmandu School of Law. I here will be outlining about Nepal's geography firstly, and then slowly I would go with the first appearance of Nepal in UNFCCC in Rio de Janeiro and the progressions and its reports extracts that has been provided. Then slowly I would be delving into the laws, frameworks as well as policies that has been implemented in Nepal and its progressive law, which probably outstands because of the authorities that has been given to disaster risk management and things like that. Then slowly I will go into the diaspora and dynamics of intersectionality of how indigenous people, likewise in Nepal, and also is the relative circumstances of Indonesia being affected with climate changes, and how policy framework has its obligations and responsibility to cover and also to assist and help the ones who are in needs, actual needs when it comes to climate calamities and disasters. So without further ado, going to my next slide, I would like to request to change the slide, please.
The next slide, sir.
Yes, please.
More?
No, at the second. Apologies. I'm just being able to see the first slide in my video.
Slide.
Yeah. So could you skip to the next slide, please?
This slide?
Unfortunately, in my Zoom, it's still in the first slide. I'm sorry. I can just see the first slide right now. But doesn't
go
matter.
to the number 2. Slide number 2.
Slide number.
Mr. Anuda, please go to slide number 2. Click on that. Yeah.
This slide?
No,
Number
another.
2, yes.
Before.
Thank
Yes,
you.
that's it. Thank you very much. So as you can see, I'm not quite sure if everybody is quite familiar with Nepal and its geography and its features, or some might also be. Some would have visited Nepal, some would have not. So here I would like to give you a little brief about Nepal's geography first before starting everything, because I really believe we need to have a certain level of visualization when you have a perspective of Nepal. I mean, I cannot just go on explaining about Nepal without these pictures mentioned. So as you can see here, you see beautiful mountains there. You also see some places of hills, and you also see terrains. And overall, you also see a indication of where the geography is precisely mentioned and how Nepal's geography works. So Nepal as a country is a landlocked country, unlike Indonesia. I'm aware Indonesia is one of the countries who have a largest number of islands, and which certainly is not a landlocked country. However, a landlocked country like Nepal, we have three terrains, which is very crucial. In between China and India, we fall upon in the center like a yam of China and India. And we can see in geography as well how the mountains also resides in Nepal, how hilly areas also resides in Nepal, and how the terrain region also resides in Nepal. So it's a small country, but however, it has a very complicated geography. As you can see, the tallest mountain in the world, Mount Everest, as well as in Nepal, whereas you can see a flat patch which is very prospective for agriculture and also for wildlife species. And you can also see hills, one of the breathtaking, stunning hills in Nepal as well. And this also, the hills and terrains also somewhere signifies me with the geography of the Java and geography of Sukabumi as well, where you can correlatively see hills as well as volcanoes, which is not a feature in Nepal, of course, but the terrain, which is a flat surface as well. So this was a preliminary introduction about Nepal from my side. Now moving on to the next slide, please. Yeah. So after a good introduction about Nepal in this limited time, now I would like to share my thoughts upon the first recognition of Nepal and its participation in Rio de Janeiro, which consequently was a historic conference and convention making in the perspective of environment law and its guidelines. So if I have to explain, UNFCCC means United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So this was the very first time. If we talk about the history, we also can date back to Stockholm Conference, where it all started, where the developing first country and nations started to give their accountability, and they started to understand and realize that environment is also becoming a big aspect in the diaspora of humankind, and it should be one of the things that should be considered for the prospect of future and other upcoming generation. And likewise, after the Stockholm Conference, in an official manner and the concerns of environment, we come to UNFCCC, which was held in Rio de Janeiro from 3rd June to 14th June 1992. And I believe Indonesia was also a part of UNFCCC, if I'm not wrong. And they also preliminarily, like Nepal, ratified the convention and made it in compliance in around 1994. So similarly, Nepal also joined this convention. It also was obliged with the convention, and it started enforcement of its convention and appliance of domestic laws in accordance to the convention in 2nd May of 1994. So moving forward for the 4th slide, please. I'm being
Faisal, please mute yourself.
Noise.
Faisal.
Yeah, that's perfect. So if you could see at the presentation, if you could slide it a little bit up, I'm afraid few words are missing, but however, I'll explain it to you. So even I went through the report and first communication that Indonesia did with the UNFCCC. It was very brilliantly packed with concerning environment and climate changes that has been in progress in Indonesia. And similarly, like that, we also have key highlights of Nepal's initial national communication and other reports, and what it significantly suggested regarding Nepal, which might be a crucial thing to understand in the midst of while we're talking about climate changes and how a state addresses climate changes with its nature of virtue. So firstly, Nepal had addressed sectors like agriculture. Just a matter of amazing fact that I would like to pour upon here is Nepal still is an agrarian country, which means that population and the economy relies on agriculture and production. So agriculture and water resources, well, if I have to familiar you with Nepal's context, Nepal is second largest water resource, the country which has second largest water resources, freshwater resources after Brazil. So water resource sector is also very rich in Nepal, which was also governed in the climate changes aspect. And then natural forest sector, as I've told you, with a lot of hills and a lot of terrains, Nepal consists of a lot of species and diversities of floras as well as faunas. And talking about the floras, we have so many, even Indonesia and us, we share a lot of minerals, we share a lot of plants with properties of curing medicinal purposes, and with a lot of other things that we call as Ayurveda, if you're familiar. And also towards health sector, because health sector is also one of the immersive and most forward coming sectors of Nepal, which also has a lot to do with contribute with climate changes as well, which I will be definitely talking about in the later stages of lectures. Then we come to tourism. Indonesia and Nepal both actually share one of the biggest incomes and economy with tourism. I have not yet had the privilege to come to this beloved country of Indonesia, but how I've researched and how I listen about Indonesia, it's a very peaceful place. It's a place where you can find diverse geographical locations, streaming from beaches to even hills and even volcanoes. So even Nepal, as I said, is one of the pioneers of trekking as well as adventure activities, because you have Mount Everest, you have a lot of mountains where you can climb the mountains, and there is a different aspect of tourism with these kind of geographical situation in Nepal as well. And coming to road and transport as well, how to facilitate the people as well as a common brink of understanding between the climate changes as well as development, which also falls under road and transportation. One of the preliminary things that they had addressed is this. And then we come to mitigation options for greenhouse gas assessment. So in these era of 1992, this was one of the main immersive topic, where the control of CFCs and greenhouse gases were to be precisely taken care of. So Nepal also suggested a assessment regarding the CFCs and greenhouse gases, as well as the industrial waste that would have a big impact of contributing in climate changes in a negative manner. So if you see one slight analysis that I would like to give you right up here would be how a situation where I think everybody might be might have a certain knowledge about shared but different responsibility, common but shared responsibilities as well when it comes to environment. And if you see country like Nepal in its developing phase has this burden of exploiting the resources for its development, as well as having a sustainable as well as and environmental considerations, because with no violation of the UNFCCC, of course, and the provisions of differentiated responsibilities that has been given, Nepal has its slight brink in a developing phase where, as I said, it differs from two things, especially one from the need of development and as well as the need of conservation of environment. So these are the things that was identified with the regards of greenhouse wastes and its assessments, as well as the industrial wastes. Then, as I said, the vulnerabilities, identifying Nepal's vulnerabilities and adaptations. Adaptation as a geographical sense is very complex, and people live in hills. They also have few residencies in mountains and also Tarai. So this is a challenging aspect of adaptation in Nepal, where you have to have these certain senses of urbanizations and planning. And without it, because a lot of it's an epicenter of earthquake. Before I mention all of these things, it also had a disastrous earthquake shook on 2015, which almost took lives of 10,000s of people, and correlatively, as I said, landslides and flood, which is also very recent, that I would be sharing with you later. So these are Nepal's vulnerabilities. It always in once every decade, I would suggest, in a very subjective manner, of course, but once in a decade, Nepal has been seeing these kind of calamities, climate calamities that you can observe in Nepal, like the recent flood that happened, and 10 years ago, as I said, the earthquake on 2015, which was really tremendously hurtful for Nepal. And then the report also suggested vulnerability assessments, which also I'll be coming later with a lot of policies that have implied these vulnerability assessments. Then we come to afforestation and non-reserve habitats. So this was also in compliance with the first report that Nepal presented and communicated with UNFCCC, where non-reserve habits were taken into considerations and the places were located, as well as afforestation was being implemented, where there was prospectus and where there was no much intervene and interference of the humankind. Then we also come to a very interesting thing called the climate models. If you are not quite enlightened with the climate models, it is a part of a it is a part of a software. It is a computing thing that tells you and gives you a brief of the climate changes that's going to happen in the forthcoming futures. So these are the climate models which there are reports of climate models that Nepal has used in terms of 5 years, 10 years ahead of the way. And these climate models were really effective at that time as well. And policy framework and adaptation strategies as well. So from I wouldn't be going down the line with a lot of legal provisions of Nepal. I would be highlighting few critical ones which can definitely be found or also been interpreted in the Indonesian Disaster Management Act. As I saw, I think it was from 2007, if I'm not sure. So there are few adaptations of strategies and policy frameworks, which also I will be coming in the later stages of this lecture. Then technology transfer as well. So if you see one of the issues that I already highlighted before, Nepal being a developing country and its competitiveness and comparativeness with the first world countries. And the technology transfer was really a crucial part regarding these few subjects as well. Because if you really look into the technology that Nepal is equipped with, it might not be so equipped like the first world countries and the developed countries of those time. So the process of technology transfer is also one of the biggest icebreakers and one of the biggest changing aspects that can help in reducing climate changes and its negative effects, of course. And then there is climate-induced disasters. I need not tell you much about it. Even as Dr. Pradhan stated, Indonesia has flash floods. Indonesia also have high chances of landslides as well. Probably not that much of a volcanic eruption, but also one of the things that should be taken into considerations. So these are few things that Indonesia faces, and likewise in Nepal. If you talk in the context of the floods, you can talk in the context of glacier erosions. You can also talk in the context of flood, landslides, and earthquakes, as I've specifically told. And also another critical aspect which also contributes to all these things that even probably Indonesia shares is forest fires, which is really one of the things that contribute to landslides and has been a big issues that has come up in Nepal. Now, if I can now proceed through the next slide. Can we shift to the next slide, please?
I have, sir. Did you see the new slide?
Yeah, next slide.
This slide not moving? This slide?
No, I'm afraid not. The fourth slide, which says intersectionality, vulnerabilities, and impacts of climate change on gender, social. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. So now, as we have already seen the progresses of these three reports of Nepal, we can now slightly go these report, the preliminary report of Nepal. Now we can see the social and economic perspectives regarding climate change and Nepal as well. So if the participants are well informed with intersectionality and how it works, one of the core sociological theories, I would like to show and forecast how Nepal has its vectors of life influenced with climate changes, how a person is drastically affected with the climate change, with its livelihood, and also their lifestyles. So, firstly, because of these very intentions, I start upon independency on weather pattern for livelihoods. So, if you see Nepal. As I said, it's an agrarian country where the preliminary economy relies on the, agriculture. So, likewise, it also depends on weather patterns, if you can get it. So, if the climate changes is supposedly affecting the weather patterns, it is very obvious that the livelihoods of farmers, especially, is going to have a drastic shift because of the uneven circumstances of weather. So, some part of the year it might rain a lot, which is also not required. Some part might go through a thorough drought, which is also not required. So these kind of changes pattern of weather due to climate change has been a very very crucial point where farmers and the population of the country has been suffering recently. And also in the next point, as I mentioned, floods. If you see, climate change is bringing floods. Floods are also bound to bring waterborne diseases. And one reference that I can give to you is in the capital of Nepal, which is known as Kathmandu. Kathmandu never had the problem of dengue mosquitoes and other dreadful mosquitoes, which aid in drastic health changes and also makes a person really really sick. So Kathmandu never ever since up to 2024 ever had any prospectus of dengue in the capital. But however, due to recent floods and landslides, the waterborne diseases like dengues and its emergence have been at peak in Nepal, where in Kathmandu almost a lot of population have even died because of the disease. Now, as I come into the roles of men and women in a natural resource management, of course, you can see how men and women both are a part of a society and also are a part of natural resource managers. They manage natural resource, whether it be in householding by the women or whether it be in farming or especially in patriarchal society like Nepal, where the men go and are the breadwinners and the women are specifically ones who are caretakers of the home and the family. You can see the resources and its management also being in effect because of the brain drain, as well as the migrations of Nepalese people abroad. And because of the lack of these calamities and because of the impact of these calamities and lack of opportunities, people are well settled and going outside abroad, which is massively affecting these natural resource management and its track of Nepal. And then we go to forest degradation, changes in rainfall pattern. Similarly, that I've said in weather pattern that is being affected for agriculture and farmers. Samely goes with the forest degradation as well. I mean, if there is a lot of prospects in Nepal and plans in Nepal where they have still not had strategic action regarding urbanization. So people are just going on the except for the sanctuaries, people are going on in the midst of hills, and then they're burning down the woods, they're burning down the trees, and they're trying to have these manipulation of land and also its ownership and acquirance, which has definitely affected in the forest degradation. And such forest degradation has also cumulatively affected to other vulnerable and marginalized people in Nepal, who also share the forest as their main resource, who also share the forest even as their accommodation, and also the forest resources as their daily livelihood. Coming to the next point that I would like to clarify, this point that I've specifically said, the indigenous nationalities and tribal groups, they are the ones who have been really affected by climate changes in Nepal. If you see, from what I believe, Indonesia also similarly shares the tribal groups which resides in forests, or maybe at other ethnic groups which resides at Indonesia. Some that I would like to mention in Nepal are Mazi, Raute, and Chepang, as we call it. So they are one of those people who have indigenous and traditional technologies that helps them in their livelihood, and which are completely reluctant and dependent on forest and natural resources. So these people have been very much affected with the sudden climate changes, as well as the deforestation which humankind is ultimately responsible for. And this is definitely bringing their bringing to their resource scarcity, food insecurities, and also majorly their livelihood and lifestyle, as they have no homes to live currently, because most of them prior to them live in villages. They have their own sort of society. They nourish their technologies, but recent times they have been evacuated because of these legal manipulations, all these climate changes aspect and such circumstances. Now, as we come to next part, it's intersectionality, as I told. So all these part of climate changes that I've explained now, with the vector of poverty and food insecurity, has been directly influenced with the climate change. Thus, I would like to bring upon and highlight this point, as I've proved how a lot of aspect of climate changes is socially and economically making the marginalized group a lot more vulnerable. So these are the things that has been going on in Nepal, and the intersectionality, as you can see, because of the climate change. Or a certain example that I would like to give is a person who belongs to a remote places, just as I told, like a tribal group, who has no responsibility, who has no accountability for the climate change, but is eventually being directly affected, has had the lack of resources, which is attaining it the poverty to its verge, and they are having a lot of poverty there. They really have scarcity of food and resources, eventually making them poorer and poorer day by day, which is ultimately one of the vectors delivered by climate change. So this is a socio-economic analysis that I would want to highlight when it comes to climate changes and the aspect of livelihood of people. And another fact produced by UNDP was the crop loss in Nepal, and how agrarian country it is, and how 90% of crop loss in Nepal is caused by weather or meteorological events. So this preliminarily proves how the dynamics of lives and livelihood of people in Nepal, whether it be in indigenous, whether it be ones who are staying in urban places or in cities, eventually we all are becoming and getting these effects of climate changes day by day. Now, I would like to move on to next slide, please. So this slide gives you an aspect of resources and sources of laws in Nepal, which has dynamically helped to fight with these socio-economic problems, as well as the problem of climate change. So firstly, I would like to be starting with the policies, the sources of law, acts, and then policy, plans, and frameworks, of course. And I would also give these things which was referenced from the report, second and third report and communication that was done by Nepal towards UNFCCC. So every of these references, I'll also be sharing few incredible reports, books that I have acquired, and that I have that has helped me prepare this lecture as well later, so that you can have much more brief analysis of what actually is the situation of Nepal, as well as how certain interpretations and implications of legal measures and policy frameworks can help in these times of climate changes. So now moving on, I would like to first address Constitution of Nepal 2015, which is of course the latest constitution of Nepal, and and the relevance to climate changes and socio-economic perspective in this is that Constitution of Nepal has secured fundamental rights up upon Article 30 for the right to healthy and clean environment. So, as this is a fundamental right, this is one of the very important measures that Nepal has taken when it comes to environment and climate changes. And you can also see in the constitution of the schedules 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 are specifically designed for giving the authority, delivering the roles, responsibility, and coordination mechanisms for such rights, where every individual deserves a healthy and a clean environment. And with progress of the constitution, there is also another act, Environment Protection Act 2019, of course, which definitely talks about how the quasi-judiciary practice of local government can be held accountable with the Environment Protection Act as well. So the act that I have not mentioned here, but subsequently helps in also promoting the Environment Protection Regulation Act, is Local Government Operation Act, where on an administrative purpose in the decentralized federal government of Nepal, the local governments have these certain authorities, autonomy, and central government also has its authority, but specifically local governments for acting upon in these unforeseen circumstances. So if you see in Nepal, if there is a flood, let's say going on in a province, then the local government also has its benefits, has its funds that could be provided on an immediate note in terms of these natural calamities, which have been secured by Local Government Operations Act. And followingly, with Environment Protection Act, it also certifies that any industries, any companies, any institution should have a mandatory note of EIA done in order to open up or proceed further with their infrastructure. So EIA, I might not have to elaborate it much, though it's environment impact assessment. So with the degree of such measures and assessment, opening up a industrial company, opening up institution is one of the measures which will definitely keep up with the climate change and will also help in understanding how relativity of development and inevitability of climate changes both in hand can work. It also covers an initial environment examination where a company has its report set and how its responsibility with the environment has been in action and in procurement with the aspect of their own businesses and needs as well. So this is one of the important thing which also has brought Environment Protection Regulation 2020, which is directly regulated with Environment Protection Act of 2019. So I might not need to much go through it because it's the regulation of the act. Now, then we also arrive in National Climate Change Policy. So, National Climate Change Policy 2019 has been contributing in developing climate resilient society. So, if we talk about climate changes, its education, its enlightenment with all the masses of country, these are the objectives that has been identified by the Climate Change Policy 2019, which mainstreams the relevant policy, strategy, plan and programs for social and gender inclusion, which I have mentioned previously as well, the intersectionality, and it also brings the framework of preparedness and a sense of preparedness with the people that would be affected in the premises of such calamities. And then we go to a very progressive law. In fact, if implemented very well, this law can be really referenced up. I would also be sending the links to Dr. Pradhan if the participant could have a brief through this act, which is known as Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Act 2074. Mind you, 2074 is Nepalese standard date, so I hope you all wouldn't be confused that I'm talking about 50 years later or things like that, and that's definitely not. It's 2074, which means in the year of 2017 of what we say AD. So this progressive act has had its implication where it is predominantly given authorities, it is charged the accountable sector of government, it is charged the bureaucracy, it is also given autonomy to this authority, which is known as Disaster Risk Reduction Management Authority, which throughout Nepal has been working in these unforeseen circumstances, let's say a landslide, let's say a flood, and let's say all of these situations where it hampers a normal livelihood of people. And also it has also helped in educating the risk involved in calamities and how to cope up with it in the communal aspect as well. It has definitely given contribution and educated a lot of people, and also given authorities to regarding the local governments to act upon these certain unforeseen circumstances as well. I would be going briefly through this act probably in the next lecture, if I find so, because this is one of the key lectures that could be developed when it comes to the Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Act 2074 Nepal. So these were the relevant laws, and beside that I have other few acts that I have not mentioned. One would be Local Government Operation Act 2017. I did slightly say about it, how it gives then autonomy to local governments for acting upon such unforeseen circumstances, even providing fund reliefs for the people who have been suffered. And then we come up onto the policies such as National Disaster Risk Reduction Policy 2018. This was also really effective and was also a very progressive document if implemented, which I would be again sending the links to Dr. Pradhan with my paper that I have in it. And there's also climate change policy that we also mentioned. It also gave such impacts regarding climate changes that I had to mention. And then there are strategic plannings as well, like Disaster Risk Reduction National Strategic Plan of Action 2018 and by 2030. So these plan of actions are really, I really believe Indonesia also shares such action plans. However, Nepal, being a landlocked country, has its own features and does differentiate a lot more even from the geography of Indonesia. And we also have National Strategic Action Plan for Search and Rescue 2013. This was quite significant and had its importance because in 2015, as well as in recent 2024 flood and 2015 earthquake, the strategic plan for search and rescue was very mandatory because there were a lot of people who were misplaced, who couldn't be traced because of the disaster that happened. And these kind of strategic plans have effectively helped Nepal in its unforeseen circumstances. There are also mentionable guidelines such as Disaster Preparedness and Response Guideline. This is really beneficial and helpful to educate the community with what kind of measures should be taken in such circumstances of disasters. And there is also auditorial guidelines for initial rapid assessment. So when you talk about disasters, they have its shortcomings, they also have its long-term effects. So these kind of guidelines help the rapid assessment and the response team to act according to the priorities and act accordingly as well. So then we come onto Local Disaster Risk management planning guidelines. So these guidelines also specifically is aided to the local governments, where they can be prepared for such natural calamities to occur, and also aid people in the times of need, because approaching to central government has its own delays. Rather, a local government given an autonomy can have references of such guidelines, which can be really helpful in the times of such unforeseen circumstances. So there are also a few frameworks that I would like to mention. It's environment-friendly local governance framework. It is National Disaster Response Framework. We don't have to go much in depth about it, as it is already being mentioned by the topic. It's by the title itself of what it works upon. And now, as we slightly go upon the plans, programs, and frameworks again, few frameworks that was taken into consideration by Nepal in its report was Nepal Climate Change Support Program. So Nepal Climate Change Support Program was the initiative that gave aid to these adaptive plan of actions, such as National Adaptive Program of Action, which we call NAPA, as well as Local Adaptation Plan of Action, LAPA. So what do you actually mean by NAPA and LAPA? So these are one of the things, these are one of the first initiations that was taken by the government and its response towards climate change. So what NAPA, National Adaptation Program of Action, did was it identified 9 urgent and immediate climate change adaptation priority programs related to the thematic sectors like agriculture, forest, biodiversity, water resources, health, infrastructure. So in a suggestive note as well to Indonesia, if there is adaptation program, national adaptation program like these, then it can really help educate the calamities, climate changes, as well as help in adapting to these situations. And similarly, with its occurrence also came local adaptation plan of action, which suggested that national scale adaptation activities or programs to address local specific adaptation needs. So it was moreover, NAPA was moreover designed for a national occurrence, whereas with the subdivisionization of LAPA resided in the local authorities, it also addresses the local specific needs of such calamities as well. So then we move on towards National Adaptation Plan, NAP. This is also one of the adaptation plans, as said, which is in action. It also gives you a brief about reducing vulnerability to the impacts of climate change by building adaptive capacity and resilience. So this also helps in capacity building of when it comes to such adaptation programs. And with these certain references, I would like to now move forward with the framework, which is climate change adaptation and disaster risk management in agricultural priority framework for action, which is outdated, of course, but dates in 2011 up till 2020. As again mentioning, Nepal being an agrarian country, you have priorities for agriculture, and in these kind of disaster management and the paradoxes a farmer faces, these frameworks truly help the local governments as well as the state to help the priorities of agriculture being taken upon. So if you understand flood, a slight brief to you, if you go through the calamities like flood, and if you go through calamities like earthquake, of course, contrasting both of these sectors, you realize earthquake might have a tangible effect, might have a short tangible effect, and its impact on the livelihood of person where supposedly a home is damaged. Let's say their accommodation is damaged, or such occurrence occurs in earthquake, of course. But When it comes to floods, when it comes to landslides, it is moreover regarding the erosion of lands. So, what erosion of land does to a farmer, to be specific, is it completely erodes their occupation. Like I said, the changes of weather pattern. Similarly, in floods, if you realize, the entire occupation of a farmer gets devastated, not only their livelihood. So, flood specifically, since it's also in reference to Sukabumi and Indonesia, floods are that kind of calamities which not only affect you on a short-term aspect, but also definitely affects you in a very long-term manner. Being an occupational farmer or anyone who is related with agro industry. So these clauses, these frameworks help such people and prioritizes government in agriculture framework and how disaster risk management can be implemented in these frameworks of agriculture. Now, as we move on to the next slide. Yeah. So these are few photos that I actually collected by myself when I went through the places which were devastated by the earthquake devastated by the flood which recently occurred in September. If you can have a look on the pictures, you can see how the erosion of land has taken place, how the infrastructure like roads have been devastated by the floods and by the uprising of river, of course, and how houses have been affected, the normal daily accommodation have been affected. And if you interestingly look at the bottom, you can realize it was a very beautiful petrol pump that was in business there, which also had its infrastructure development going on, which had and I had a talk with the people. He mentions how he took loans from bank for a big infrastructure development in this petrol pump, but now he sadly just remains with nothing actually. If you can have a look on that picture, it's dreadfully gone. The petrol pump has been devastated, and so has been the person. So you see the intersectionality of climate changes and its direct implication and its effect on a common man, a layman of Nepal or any other country. A live example, of course. Now, as we go to the next slide, please. Yeah. So similarly, you can look at these pictures as well. You can see how flood had flooded away because of the widening of the riverways, widening of the river and its intensity. You could see the phenomena and the pictures what took place in Nepal. So similarly with the landslide that occurred in Nepal, you can see how the erosion had taken place and how a big chunk of even the hills, how big chunk of villages have been completely eroded away by this effect of landslide, which can be also interlinked with Indonesia, because as far as my readings, I also saw that landslide is also one of the mass climate changes effect on Indonesia. So look at the pictures carefully. You can see a village almost being eroded away. You can see a big hill which has eroded completely. And you can also see a house which used to be a livelihood of a person, but now it's nothing but a debris. And you can also see how the soil have been eroding and how the vegetations cannot help in these types of erosion if not properly guided. Especially because Nepal also has hills which has red muds. So red muds are very easily eroded. It does not take much to erode a red mud, if you might have a certain knowledge. So now, moving on to the next slide, if you're done with the picture. So, as you can see, almost 70 billion rupees, which estimates around 124 million USD, was a loss of Nepal in this September's landslide and flood. You can see how even it has shaved off 1% of the GDP, which is tremendous damage because flood, as I gave you a contrast, no any climate calamities can be in a comparative way, but when you see the damages that is being dealt with, you can see how infrastructure have been distorted, infrastructure have been destroyed by the recent flood. It actually, to such extent that it has been estimated of shaving off almost 1% of the entire GDP of Nepal, which is really, really disastrous. Now we can move on to the next slide. So here, it's a bit of a slide. Of course, Associate Professor David Pradhan will be giving you the slide, I assume. You can have a look. You can see what the situation was in the 26th and 28th September of 2024 in Nepal, where it ran so much of rain was there, so much of rain that it had never seen such flow in the Saptakoshi River, as we say, in 56 years of time. So even I was a witness here. I listened a lot of experiences here in Kathmandu as well. We were devastated that few buildings were affected. Even a hospital was shrinking. Many poultries and farms were devastated because of the rise of the water levels, which can be in relevance with the flash flood of Indonesia as well. But that was not merely it. You can see the pictures how these communities, local communities, has been even tremendously affected with these kind of situations. So I was baffled when I went and experienced and saw the villages and the people who have been in sufferings due to this large calamity that took place because of a 2-day non-stop rainfall. Even a matter of fact, a lot of people even mentioned that if there was a rainfall even more than 15 minutes of what it had, then the damage would have been even double the times of what it has already been here. So you can imagine what kind of a grateful situation it was here in Nepal in circumstances of flood and landslide. So if you go through there, as I said, there were also key action that had been taken place by the emergency cabinet meeting, which was enough or not, I leave it to your speculation, and I would also give you a further analysis about that as well. But you can see how you can see the key events such as providing 2 lakh worth of Nepalese rupees, which would be costing around 1800 US dollars, provided to the families who have been affected by the flood. They also gave 1 billion Nepalese rupees directly in an emergency to the disaster management fund, so that they could be well equipped of the funds that would be required to the people who are suffering as well. And the government also implied that free treatment should be provided to all the individuals who were injured in the disaster. So these were few of the notable action that the Nepal government showed. But however, is it enough or not? Based on the ethnography that I went through, based on an auto-ethnographic research as well as few conversation with people, there is still a lack of accessibility that needs to be done, because the decisions have been already passed. Although going to the local governments, reaching out to all the communities, vast communities, faraway communities, have been one of the problems that the government is facing regarding these situations. Now, as we move on to the next slide. So now you can find, as I said, Nepal being a federal government, it has a decentralized form of government where you have local government as well, state governments, as well as the central government. So in these time of calamities, you can see how the responsibilities have been differentiated, and how the risk, the sources of law that I mentioned you previously has been really helpful in understanding
Mr.
this.
Kshitiz, sorry to interrupt you between the lecture, but can you please wrap it up a little bit faster because it's already 1 hour, and
Okay.
the seminar was about to be like 1 hour and 30 minutes.
No problem.
That's right.
I was deliberately prepared for a 2 hour session though, but it's fine. Thank you for alarming me with the time constraints. So you can see how involvement of central government and local government in the time of disasters are really much in need, and where the central government cannot reach places, the local government having its autonomy should work accordingly with level 2 and level 3 of disasters being inflicted and how to have a correct response with it. These are few critical things that I would like to mention when it comes to these things. So even witnessing, there is such paradoxes that you can see where a person suffers through these calamities, and somewhere local government feel helpless because they cannot reach up to central government at the time of such unforced circumstances because of lack of preparedness as well. So I think these risk reduction programs and act will definitely aid upon giving us insight and education to the authority holders in what to do and which policies to appeal and which places to wander upon in the times of unforeseen circumstances that is brought by calamities change. So this might ease up a little bit more of the pressure and the pressure that local government goes through, the and the local people go through as well in combined with the central government and its confusions. Now, as I come upon on the next slide, so now you can see I have also specifically made this slide for Forest Act, because when you see these, it's my analysis that also can be referenced with the September landslide and flood that went through in Nepal. Deforestation and forest fires, these are one of the really important aspect which is affected in such climate changes and erosion of soils, I must say. So I've specifically designed this page to understand how forest fires can affect climate change in a tremendous manner and can also have its reactive effects like landslides, like floods as well, specifically landslides. You can see forest fire occurrence between March 10 and May 1 in 2024 was tremendous, where different states of the country was affected likewise. So in order to also come in compliance with the legal frameworks and policy that has been distributed, we have forest fire management strategy. The strategy preliminarily goes through the policies and organizational level structures have been implemented to mobilize local community, civil society, government and non-government bodies, and make preparedness to take pre-information about the possible risk. So when a wildfire occurs or a forest fire which is deliberately done by human beings, as I said, for possession of the lands of government, which is a major issue, a big legal issue as well. So these kind of acts has been predominantly being responsible for bigger calamities and natural disasters and climate changes. So for that, in defense, Nepal's provision of Forest Act 2019, section 49, subsection D, has kept a certain level of incentive fine to the people, obligatory fine and charges to the people who have been found doing such heinous acts that has been destroying the climate and livelihood of the people in Nepal. So this is about it. We can go to the next slide now. So these are a few beautiful pictures that I've gathered of Indonesia. And what I realized is the lecture is really incomplete without interlinking the shared conditions of Indonesia and Nepal. There's not much to mention about that. I think throughout this lecture, I've been deliberately telling how the geographies somewhere match and how the legal policies and frameworks should be adopted in reference to Nepal that I've given, and how you can understand that the problems that these both countries in a developing phase, of course, are facing of the natural disaster as well as climate changes. So firstly, I would like to mention the first interlinking that I saw was geography. Of course, the hilly parts as well as the terrain parts, and how it's being eroded. One of such references I can tell is about 10 years ago, even recently as well. There was a flood in the terrain, flat lands of Nepal as well, which is a flash flood, of course, and a lot of people being affected with it, which was certain situation of the Sukabumi, as we have seen. So there are a few calamities that we share, but there has been a precise planning of legal frameworks and few suggestive manners regarding long-term and short-term solutions for floods, perspective of landslides, and socio-economics as well. So can I move on to the next slide? If you can change the slide. Yeah, thank you very much. So as you can see, the long-term and short-term things, the perspectives that we can take, which is slightly not mentioned in the provisions and frameworks that I studied, would be a restoration of agricultural land and how to be dealt with it. Since the ultimate reference and relativity could be found in flash floods and flood that has occurred in Nepal, the lessons Nepal has learned would be soil rehabilitation programs. So what does it mean is specifically the need of soil testing and the need of rehabilitating the fertility of soil, which is one of the main concerns. As you saw in the photo previously of that place where there was a complete erosion, and also the petrol pump that I mentioned, you can see it really had a beautiful land. It really was very fertile, but now it's left with nothing but sand and rocks, the stones that you find in rivers. So these kind of soil rehabilitation programs is very crucial in terms of flash flood as well, and in terms of a big flood where a river takes by the land, which is really needed and which should be considered by the policies and frameworks and its adaptation. Then we go to land assessment and planning. Similarly, with soil testings, as previous, we can know and understand if the land will be eroded again, or we can have infrastructure developed and built in that. Because on a short term, Nepal also, given its analysis, has made roads which would be again affected largely on the times of monsoons and rain again. So that is not a long-term solution. That is simply a solution which can even create a bigger disaster later on in the days to come. So long-term solutions are understanding and doing land assessment and planning before you adopt an infrastructure, a road or transport utilities, and understand that it's very much required, and if not done properly, then the infrastructure would be seconds away from getting destroyed by these following calamities like flood. You could also give a reference now to disaster preparedness education. You can understand how education and skill development in the communities and remote areas is very much important for people to stay prepared and give their efforts, give their conscience to act accordingly on these unforeseen circumstances, because it really prevents panic situations, which eventually helps in uniting people and also working together towards these disasters. Then we also come to sustainable land policies. Sustainable land policies are also really important because these kind of land use policies are very much helpful for protecting vulnerable areas from future disasters, because there are zones, as Lapa and Napa also presides, the locations where such kind of erosions or natural disasters are to be taken place should be considered, and the land use policies should also take measures with these vulnerabilities that they have. So these are few things. Some economic and financial things that I have not mentioned here could also be providing farmers with insurance and bringing such policies where on erosion, if haven't been given and filled the insurance, would be covered in these kind of natural calamities, and encouraging that to the farmers would be very much appreciative and also would help their dynamics and livelihood later in these times of unforeseen circumstances. So these and also interlinking of protection of indigenous and tribal communities is one of the interlinks that I've found with Nepal and Indonesia. Indonesia has a lot of tribal communities, so Nepal does too. So to protect them, to give them the fundamental rights is, I think, a good perspective that both countries need to start. Where you take care of the development at one hand, but also preserve these tribal communities and their indigenous technologies and skills, so that we can have ample amount of indigenous knowledges with us in the latter stages of developing civilization. And we also can see that implying to legal frameworks and tackling disaster vulnerabilities all resides in interpretation and practicality of these frameworks, and its alert and rapid implementation of these frameworks that are very progressive. So I think that was from my side. I really think these are the things that was to be mentioned in this lecture. And further, if there is any question, of course, I would be very pleased to entertain your questions as well right now. So with this being said, I conclude my lecture. Thank you very much.